Welcome to our July webinar, a collaborative presentation of the Federation for Children with Special Needs and the Recruitment Training and Support Center, RTSC. My name is Mary Beth Landy, and I am the Training and Support Specialist for RTSC. Today's webinar is What to Do During the Summer Slump, presented by Elizabeth Beth Bostic. Beth is trained as a special education advocate parent consultant through the Federation's Parent Consultant Training Institute. She is the founder of Parent Coach Limited, where she has been effectively practicing for almost 10 years as an advocate consultant. Beth is also the past president of SPAN, the Special Education Advocacy Network, a network of special needs advocates in Massachusetts, as well as a member of IMPACT, Ability Steering Committee, COPA, which is Council for Parent Attorneys and Advocates, PIC, and PIC. She has previously been a member of ARC Board and the Reading Special Education Advisory Council, let alone she is busy. On top of that, Beth is also the parent of 2 children with special needs. Having studied abroad, worked in the diverse and inclusion field for over 20 years, and partnered with local community-based organizations, she has a particular passion and affinity for meeting the needs of underserved and culturally diverse families. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Well, I'm very excited to be here today. Let's get right to it. I'm sure many of you are like me. You're at home with your wonderful children, and it's coming towards the end of July, and we're heading into August. And some of you, if you're like me, are probably engaged in a countdown to the number of days until school starts again. So while you're in that space, I thought it would be a good idea to think about, well, what do we need to do to get ready for the fall? And how do we actually get through this period, which I call the summer slump? It's kind of you've lost excitement about the fact that they're on vacation, you're ready for them to go back, and we need to prepare for not only your children going back, but how you're going to work effectively with your team. So I'm trying to get this to move forward. If we can go to the next slide. Click on the screen. There we go. Got it. Thank you. So I'm learning as we're doing this. We're all in learning mode. Okay, so today, these are the 3 objectives that we are going to be achieving. One will be just to identify resources that will help you to be more effective as an effective partner in your IEP team. I have been doing this for many years for my children and for many other families, and there's always something to learn and always ways that you can get better. So how can we do that? Also, we're going to explore ways on how you can get organized in preparation for the upcoming year. I don't know about you, but my desk is covered with stacks of paper of all kinds of reports and assessments and IEPs and things like that. So how do you organize that and get ready for it? And then how do you just get your head back in the game? You know, being the parent of a child with special needs, you know, we all are working really, really hard all the time, and sometimes we just need to disconnect. But how do you kind of get yourself focused and ready for this particular task? You know, and so I'm hoping that collectively we can really look at this. You know, there are so many of us who are in caregiver modes, whether you're a surrogate parent, whether you're a birth parent, whether you're an adoptive parent, whether you're a service provider. These are all tools that I think would be very effective for all of us to really explore. So let's get started. One of the things that I usually do before I start preparing for things is remind myself of some key principles that I learned over 10 years ago when I first became an advocate. There were some key phrases that kind of stuck out in my mind, and sometimes I just have to review these things to kind of ground myself. So the first one, I'll never forget this, I can even picture the woman who said it when she said it, was special education law is a needs-based law. And I think it's really important for all of us to remember that whatever happens in an IEP, whether it's an accommodation, a modification, a service, a goal, a placement, it's all based on the unique needs of the student that we're talking about. And so it's really important as the person who is advocating for any particular child to really have a clear understanding of what their needs are. Which brings me to the next very important statement that I've always learned, and I drive home with people that I work with all the time. Everything in special education is based on data and assessment. So if you're finding that a particular need is not being met, I always go back to, where's the data? What does the data tell us? Or is there even data that exists right now? And so really going back to those 2 principles, You have to identify needs, and you also have to understand what those needs are. And that is most easily done, of course, and is required in the special education process to be done through data and assessment. The last principle is one that I think as parents, we inherently know, but sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit for, or if there's somebody who's advocating for a particular child, you as that child's advocate, in whatever role you are an integral part to the child's team. You have so much information that is necessary for the team to be successful, and you also have probably a different view of the child than everybody else does. I've often heard parents and surrogate parents and service providers say, I have shared with them that this happens at home, and the team looks at me and blankly and says, well, it doesn't happen here. And I chuckle and I say, and the team is telling you the truth. They don't see it there. But that's one of the reasons why it's so important for you to really value your input and the information that you have, because you help the team to see the whole child, not just what happens when the child enters school and leaves school. So remember that you're an integral part of the team, and the law, special needs law, that needs-based law, very, very deliberately and intentionally includes you as part of this process. So don't forget that you're an important part of this, and that your voice is necessary to the success of your child's academic progress and ultimately to the success of the team. All right. So when we're talking about becoming an effective partner for your IEP team, one of the things that you really have to start with, as I said before, is understanding needs. And to me, there are really two sets of needs that you need to be aware of. That cute guy on the left-hand side happens to be my son. And he knows he's cute. Can't you tell that? His name is James. And, really understanding James's needs. James is medically complex. And so I have an ability to be able to articulate the complexity of James's needs and helping people to understand how that plays out in an academic environment, in the home environment, in the community, and really being able to articulate that and helping people to literally see what it looks like. Because James is nonverbal and he's not at a place yet where he can tell us that, but I do see how it plays out in many ways. And I have a unique insight of seeing what happens during the day and how he's applying what he is learning or is being exposed to in school and other places. But I think often as people who are advocating for these very special children, we forget that there's a whole group of people who have needs as well. And that's the team, the IEP team. And what I mean by that is your child has unique needs, the child you're advocating for has unique needs, and you may have to provide some insight as to what that really means. It might be a unique disability, it might be a unique event that's taken place, there may be some information that needs to be out there. And I think very often as advocates, we have to remember that we bring information and often resources to the team, and it's important to offer those things to the team and really engage in a partnership. It is not a we, they, it truly is a team. The way that special education law was designed was that the entire team functioned together, and you get the benefit of a collection of intelligence around the table. You have multiple people with different areas of expertise, and when you take all of that information together, it really does work very effectively. And I find the process more often than not does work well, but there are going to be times where there may be disagreements, and that may be times when you have to look at data and other information. So here are some things that you can be doing during the summer slump. And this is something actually you can be doing at all times, but sometimes the summertime offers a time where it's not quite so crazy. So one of the things is educate yourself. And then I put there as well, share the wealth. Don't just educate yourself, but take whatever information you have and share it with the rest of your team. Always kind of keep everybody in the same loop in terms of information, because holding information doesn't serve the team well. So here are some areas that you can actually educate yourself in. And this first one may seem rather obvious, but I can tell you in almost 13 years of advocacy, I'm amazed at how many parents engage in an IEP process and yet really don't know the law. You've been filling out an IEP year after year after year, and you've never taken a course on what the special education law is, nor have you taken a course that really helps you to understand what the process is. And so parents often know what their child needs, The challenge is often they don't know how to get there. And so really take the time to understand what that is. And if you're a parent or a surrogate parent or a service provider in Massachusetts, one of the best places to get that information is the Federation for Children with Special Needs. They have workshops that are available all across the country, and I could go on and on and on and on about all the wonderful things that are available there. But know that you have a free, did I mention free resource in Massachusetts? And that's true in every state. But make sure that you educate yourself so that you know what the process is, so you know what to expect, and you know how to effectively engage in the team. I have met so many school districts who really, really appreciate a parent who's informed and who engages in the process properly. It does make things a lot easier, and ultimately it will shorten the process because you're not creating more of a mess along the way. Become familiar with and educate yourself on specific phases of education. And what I mean by that is there are key transitions that happen for all children. There's transition, of course, from early intervention into preschool. There's that transition from elementary school into middle school, which we all know is a whole different animal into itself. There's a transition then here in the state of Massachusetts, which we started age 14, of transition into adulthood. What are we looking for post-secondary education? So really be very clear on what those transitions look like. Educate yourself on if your child is in elementary school and they're going to go into middle school, what does the middle school environment look like? And also look around to see what kinds of resources are out there specific to your child's disability that help you to understand what their needs are likely to be. A classic example of that is ADHD. Very often kids will do very, very well in elementary school with ADHD because they've had that teacher that's helped them to manage all of those things, and they don't have to be in any more than 1 or 2 classrooms at a time. But going to middle school, everything changes. They have to transition from classroom to classroom. They have multiple teachers with different expectations, different communication modes, different ways of doing things, and suddenly the child falls apart. If you know that you're going to be anticipating that, when you're writing their IEP with the team in that 4th and 5th grade, you can start preparing for that because it's about skill development and what do we need to anticipate they're going to need. So really educate yourself as to what things are going to look like, and then kind of look at what kind of skills are going to need to be developed in order for that child to be successful. Your child's specific disability and the latest peer-reviewed approved information. There's lots of information that's coming out all the time. And your team has a lot of expertise, but may not know about some of the information that you have firsthand information about. My child, for example, James, has a condition called kernicterus. It's a very rare condition. It's the reason he has cerebral palsy, where he had high bilirubin, it was jaundice, and the jaundice actually caused brain damage. It is a rare disease because we had pretty much eliminated it in the United States. However, it is starting to come up on the rise again. But because it's still very uncommon, not a lot of people know how this really impacts children. And so you have professionals that are working with your team who are more generalists, who may not know some of the unique traits of a child with that particular condition, and also what are some of the interventions that work most effectively with that child. You as the parent who, if you're like me, up at 2 o'clock in the morning, always doing research to find out about information, you would actually have that information to make available to them, and you could give them the articles and even let them know about workshops and things like that. Skills needed to support generalization of skills at home and the community. And these skills I'm talking about specifically for you. Do you understand how to manage your child's behavior? If your child is using assistive technology, do you have the skills necessary to do that? My son just recently started using an eye gaze device. I had to learn how to turn that on and also how to model language for him. Literacy, if your child is engaged in a specialized form of instruction for literacy, do you understand what that looks like and can you support that? These are all things that you should be equipping yourself with so that you can be an effective partner. There's so much information out there that really tells us that our children will be most successful when their parents are effective partners with their teams. I was raised in such a way where I was taught that my child's education was actually my responsibility. The team was there to help us with that process, but I needed to be engaged in that and know what they were learning and support them in any way that I could. Community resources, especially true when you're looking at children as they're getting older and starting to get into adulthood. what kinds of resources are out there, what kind of partnerships can you create as you're continuing to look at particular job skills, whether or not they're going to go off to college, whether or not they can participate in the community, travel resources. Who can you partner with to help your child acquire skills and also be an integral part of their community? You want them to be present in the community, you want people to know who they are, and you also want to be able to offer those to your school district. This is particularly true for transition age, 14 and above. Your school district will have a lot of resources, but they may not necessarily work well for your child. So establishing those partnerships with people in the community would be very, very helpful. And all of that comes down to, of course, what are some resources for your team? All of this research that you've done, don't hold it close to the vest. Actually offer it to the rest of the team. You may find that once you point them in some of those directions, it may actually bounce off other ideas or create other resources, or you might find that someone's familiar with them but had forgotten about them. Really just do whatever you can to keep yourself as well educated as possible and facilitate that knowledge with other people on your team. Also, during the summer, this is going to sound really obvious, but I find that it's something that we have to be really deliberate about. Spend time with your child, not just, shuttling them from place to place and making sure they have activities, but really sit down and talk with them, really sit down and play with them, listen and observe. During the summertime, there's always this question of how much are they generalizing and how much might they be regressing. So you might be able to see what's going on with them at that particular time. So, this means things like going to the beach or engaging in social activities, and even just a simple thing like reading with them every day. Really take the time to do those types of things with them.
I have a question for you
Yes.
that's been submitted, is that what if you're the surrogate parent for a student? How much can you engage, or what can you do to help the student over the summertime when you have limited access to the student?
That's an excellent question, and it's one that actually I'm not sure that I personally can answer because it's been quite some time since I've been a surrogate parent. I imagine that there may be opportunities for you to be able to meet with that student, but I don't know what the guidelines are within the surrogacy program, quite honestly.
They would need to be with a third party present.
Okay.
And I think it really does depend on what type of programming either the residential group home has or the residential school, or whether they're attending summer services at their own school as to what that might be. But I think even just thinking about, you bring up the good question about thinking about what their summer is going to look like, even if you're the surrogate parent, what's it going to involve, as opposed to sitting and playing video games all summer.
Right. And I think that's a conversation that, very often people forget to have that kind of conversation even in their IEP meetings. So when you're looking at the summer, depending on when that IEP meeting is taking place, really have an intentional conversation about that. What is the summer going to look like? Do you need some data collection or some anecdotal information collected so that if you can't physically be present, maybe some others can actually provide that information for you? And then if there are ways that you can schedule or insert yourself into the process with other people being aware of what that process looks like, then creating that relationship with them, I think, is critical. And especially when you're dealing with teenagers, where you need their buy-in in the process to begin with. Developing that relationship is key. So here are some areas that that I have found are really important to be working with students over the summer. Literacy. Literacy, if you think about the fact that if you take away the special education umbrella, what is the one thing that every child gets when they go home on the summertime? They get their reading list, right? Everybody's reading. They may not want to be, but they're reading, right?
Or supposed to be.
Or supposed to be, right? And I might have been that student who was doing it the few days before school started every single year and drove my parents crazy. But it's really important, literacy. I've been amazed at how reading is no longer fun for students. Because we're spending so much time testing, and what I mean by that is we're always checking for comprehension. Are they really decoding properly? Are they really getting this?
Mhm.
As opposed to really just reading for the fun of reading it and just letting the child just explore different things. So, if they're reading something and they just happen to notice something that for you is totally irrelevant, it doesn't matter. But just get them to the place where they're reading. Find out what your child's thing is. Like, what are they really interested in? I have a niece who I'm looking forward to really exploring. She has this strange fascination with sharks and reptiles. She's 3 years old. So, I mean, the two things I really don't particularly care for, but it's her thing. And so, I'm looking for books and, things like that just to help her because it'll help her get engaged. We have to make reading fun again. And, literacy is the key I don't care what kind of cognitive ability a child has. Literacy is still a very important skill. And I think very often people give up because it can be so challenging for so many students. But you have to remember that our children are lifelong learners. And one way to absolutely ensure that they have access to anything and everything that they may want to learn about is the ability to read. But also use all the tools that are available to you. There's books on tape. There are lots of different software out there that will read and highlight things as you go along. Really give the child the tools to make it as easy as possible, but make it more of a leisure activity than the activity of just, are we checking to make sure that they're answering all the right questions and dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. Let's have fun with it. And then there are the AAC users, and I have a particular passion for this. If a child is using a device to communicate, it needs to be with them at all times. Let me repeat that. If they have a device that they need to communicate with, it needs to be with them at all times. Will that be cumbersome at times? Absolutely. And trust me when I tell you, I know this from personal experience. I'm learning it even as we speak. But the bottom line is, when you and I walk into a room, we don't leave our voice in the other room. It comes with us everywhere we go. And the only way that our children are going to learn how to communicate in a variety of settings is if they're in a variety of settings with access to their device, which means that you're going to have to learn how to model how to use that device and communicate with them. And, I think as parents, we want to be perfect all the time, and it's okay to be raggedy. I think it's really important for children to see that there are times when we may not know exactly where to find that particular word or phrase in the device, but we can get there eventually. And if you can't bring the device with you, have a low-tech backup, have a printout of whatever the landing page is on their device, but make them use it. And I think especially for people, if you're with your child on a regular basis, this may apply more to somebody who's not a surrogate parent. So I'm not trying to not include you, but just a statement around, if you're at home with your child, we as parents kind of instinctively know what our child wants. We've learned how to read them over time. So sometimes it's easier not to use the device because it's clear that they want that drink or they want that book or they want that toy. Make them use it. Help them to understand how important it is, because there are going to be times when they're not with you and someone's going to need to be able to help them. And they need to be able to communicate their needs and get beyond not just what they want. This goes back to the literacy piece too. The only way to guarantee that a child or eventually an adult can communicate their particular unique thoughts is if they can write and spell and communicate. So yes, the symbols are very important. It's a great place to start, but let's get them to the place where they're actually communicating not the pre-selected phrases, but what they really truly want to say to someone, which sometimes can include, as I've learned with my son, some snarky comments.
Can I just interject a question here that we have from our audience is,
Sure.
What do advocates work on during the summer?
It's a great question.
What are you
What am I working
time?
on? What am I spending time on? Very often, it kind of falls into a couple of different categories. One is after the flurry of the end of the school year, often I'm working on catching up on all of my administrative things.
Okay.
But it's also my opportunity, because things have slowed down, if there are workshops out there about particular disabilities or interventions that I'm finding I'm running across needs for in my own clients, then I will actually attend those workshops. And I'm also very often working with clients around finishing up their due process. It could be mediations, hearings, things like that. But very often it's a time to really bulk up on some of the workshops that I haven't had an opportunity to participate in. I am a lifelong learner as well. I'm also happening to be a parent. I'm brushing up on skills from my own son.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so now that he has this device, I'm learning all about modeling, and he happens to use the pod system, so I'm learning about that system. So it really is driven by whatever kind of client needs are surfacing. And the other thing that I very often am doing is reacquainting myself with whatever some of the latest trends are in terms of hearing decisions and how that's impacting parents in general around the law.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so what are the latest advisories? So, you know, for example, there was an advisory that was just out this past May around the AT usage and what school districts should be doing to support families around that. You know, there's been a lot of work that's being done around social emotional needs and things like that. So really trying to stay abreast of what the latest trends are.
Right.
And getting a better understanding of how school districts are meeting needs and where we might be able to help them to understand what other school districts are doing that are effective that might be helpful to them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a gamut of things.
Great,
honestly.
thank you.
Mm-hmm. As you're spending time with your child or your client, here are some other things to be thinking about. You know, as you're observing them, how are their social skills? You know, what's their frustration tolerance like? Are you working on activities of daily living? You know, I often say, you know, while it's important, you know, to have those activities of daily living that might actually be incorporated into the IEP, if a child is learning how to make their bed, it shouldn't just happen in the room at school. It should actually be happening at home. What a concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, how do you help them to take those skills and move them over? And it's really important that you take the time to deliberately observe these things, and if you can, document them so that when you go into your team meeting, you can come from a place of confidence of saying, I really did see this. This happened under these circumstances. So let's make sure that everybody understands how this is playing out. The more information you can provide to your team, the better able the entire team will be able to write goals that really are effective in moving your child forward. And so we want to make sure that we are very clear on where they are in terms of their skill development today, because if you have a clear understanding of that, then it's much easier to determine what needs to happen next. Okay, so now with all of that information, how do we get organized? This first statement is probably going to seem really silly, but again, I see this happen all the time. Please read your child's IEP. I mean, really, really, really read it. Again, people have a tendency to spend so much time filling it in. When was the last time you looked at it? Do you know what your team is working on? And then once you've done that, please read the progress reports. Take the time to really go through them and compare where your child was at one time and where they are today.
Mm-hmm.
Have a solid understanding of where they were at the end of the school year. And this is especially true, especially important for students who may not have extended school year services and you felt like your child should have had them. Be clear on where they were at the end of the school year so that when you get to the beginning of the school year and you're kind of looking at where they are, can we see whether or not there has been any significant regression? Because that is a data point for you. The other thing that's important to look at is your child's assessments. Do you understand what your child's needs are? When you look at your child's assessments, are those reflected in your child's IEP? When was the last time an assessment was done? You know, because you may be at that point of that 3-year reeval, or it may be time to actually look into some other independent evaluations. But you have to be very, very clear on what's going on. And I can say, I've done this too. There are times when I've gotten a progress report in the mail and I've literally taken it out, scanned through it, put it down, and went about my day. And, you know, so I know I'm going to get called out on that later on because it's on screen now, right? But I will say that when I'm getting ready to go into a meeting, then I take the time to really look at it and see how things have been going. And sometimes, and I think sometimes unintentionally, progress reports can be a little vague. So they may say they're making progress towards, but you don't have a sense of how much meaningful progress that might be. You know, you don't have a number associated with it. So if things are not clear to you, take the time to ask the question. And it's better to ask those questions along the year as opposed to bombarding it with all of these questions all at one time. You know, if you're finding that your child is not making the kind of progress that you were expecting at this particular junction, it's always a good idea to call the team meeting and ask why people think that might be happening. Or it could be that the picture that is being reflected in the progress report is not something that's helping you to see what's really going on. So it's really about understanding what you're working on. And I always also, when you're looking at the goals, do you understand why you're working on it? You know, if you understand the why of what you're doing, then that really, you know, it's the purpose, it's the outcome, it's what we're working on long term. If you can't identify why you're working on a particular goal, then it'd be a good idea to find that out. Because if you don't want to be wasting time on things that may not be important, or for that matter, you may not be partnering effectively because you don't understand what the desired outcome is. And as you're getting organized, really ask this question: what is the data telling you? What exactly is actually happening? What data is missing? Sometimes you may find that there's a question that comes up as you're looking at it. Is everything that you're looking at actually making sense to you? If it's not, then, you know, I always go back to, do we need to do another evaluation? Is it one that needs to be done in the school? Are you close to that 3-year evaluation mark? Or is it that the evaluation that the school did, you may have some disagreements about the conclusions that they drew? So is it time to get an independent educational evaluation? I often say one of the best times to do your independent evaluation is during the summertime, because everybody else is off on a beach somewhere. And so you might actually be able to get in sooner rather than later. The other thing to do is something I learned from Wright's Law years ago. Create a graph. If you've had 3 neuropsychs and they've done all the same assessments, take the scores and plot them on a graph. See whether or not you're seeing an upward trajectory, or if you're seeing a downward trajectory, or if it's flat. But sometimes being able to see it differently can help you really understand what's going on. And then take the time to create a binder. Now, that can be hard copy, because I know many people are still old school. I myself hate paper, and so I have discovered OneNote. So, and it can really, there are lots of ways that you can do this, but I find with OneNote, you know, you can literally create an electronic notebook with tabs and everything else. And I'm often amused by how quickly I can find information in a team meeting versus other people who are leafing through paper, right? And it doesn't even have to be that way. It can literally just be a folder of PDF files of all of your child's documents, very clearly labeled, so that if you want to find that neuropsych that took place in 2016, then you can find it.
Can we just talk a little bit about data?
Sure.
I think that when people think about it, they're hearing, particularly when they're looking at goals, it says data will be collected by teacher, and then that's the end of it. There's no production of the data. You know, how does a parent really know that the data is being collected? How do they access it? And how do they review it?
Okay, those are all great questions. One of the key parts of developing an IEP and setting goals is actually having that discussion during the meeting. And it's often overlooked. So there is a section in the goal setting page that asks, how will we know that this person has reached this goal? And then very often you might see data collection, teacher observation. And depending on the significance of that goal, you may want to have a conversation about, well, who's going to be responsible for collecting the data? And what exactly is that data going to look like? Do we need to create a checklist? Do we need to, you know, and will it be collected by a team of people? Who's going to actually compile that data? How frequently is that going to happen? You may even partner with your team in developing what that rubric looks like, but have a very conscious and deliberate conversation about that, because otherwise it does seem ambiguous. That is the word I'm looking for. And then that's also one of the reasons why the way that your goals are written are so important. You know, so you want to make sure that your goals are behaviorally specific, that they describe the conditions under which the behavior is actually being demonstrated, and the level of frequency that will be considered successful. So if you don't have those 3 things, if you can't close your eyes and say, okay, I can see that, then your goal hasn't been written effectively. It's so you won't be able to get clear data if you don't even know what the target is, right? So make sure that your goals are written really, really well, and then from there, make sure that you're clear on who's going to be responsible for collecting that data, and make sure you also communicate. At some point, I may want to look at that too. You also know that there are lots of ways that data can be collected. It could be through a daily communication sheet. How often did this happen? And so and that could be helpful not only to the educational team, but if you happen to have a child who has particular medical needs or behavioral needs that are being addressed by an outside source, then you have that data to communicate with them as well. So it really is, again, about not making any assumptions about what's going to happen. Always assume the best of intentions, but put some structure to it, put some framework to it, and make sure everybody has a mutual understanding as to how it's going to play out.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so getting your head in the game. First and foremost, be very clear about what the data is telling you. Make sure that you're you have a clear understanding of what is available to you in terms of information, because your data is just that. You take that and it creates information for you, and it tells you what your child needs to be learning next. So that's going to be very important. Also, make sure that you establish that open communication with the team. Take the time to send an email in and introduce yourself. And this is especially critical when you're moving from, say, elementary to middle school, where you have a whole new team of people. Introduce yourself, let them know this is how you can be contacted. Ask them how they would like to be contacted, because we all have different communication styles. So some people prefer email. There's a lot of going on in Google Drive these days, so people might want to actually explore that. It might be that a teacher prefers that you call them at a particular time, but really ask them, what is the best way for me to reach you? And here are the multiple ways that you can reach me at any time. And we all know this to be true, that the parent who is visible and active is the parent who's going to get some sort of interaction. They're not going to be ignored, because of course they can't be. So you want to make sure that you open that communication. And what's really critical about establishing that communication is communicating partnership. It's not just I want to hear from you every single week, and these are the things I want to hear from you. It's also I need to understand this for these reasons, and I also want to support you in any way that you can. And please understand that if my child is not behaving appropriately, I want to know about that so that I can partner with you in helping them to understand that these are the standards of behavior. So really helping them to understand that you're there to support them as well. In addition to establishing the open communication, you want to establish that you have high expectations. I love this phrase here: nobody rises to low expectations. And this is another one of those areas that's twofold. High expectations in terms of reaching for the stars, in terms of achievement for your child, but also that you have high expectations of your team, that you're expecting them to rise to the occasion in terms of meeting the needs of your child, and that you're there to partner with them and support them in any way that you can to make that happen. So it's very important that you do that up front. You also want to be sure that you're requesting a progress meeting fairly early on in the school year. And by fairly early on, because I can hear all the school administrators going, oh my God, there we go. But 6 to 8 weeks into the school year, especially if you're starting to work on a new school skill area, or if it's a brand new team, or if there's been some recent developments in your child's development, then you want to make sure that you're in there as early as possible to make sure everybody is clear on what's going on and who your child is. You want to make sure that you establish a mindset of collaboration. All of us have had experiences where we may have had teams that didn't work as well as other teams. And so we may be a little emotionally worn out. We might be a little frustrated, but let's leave the past in the past and start with today, because you can't change what happened before. All you can do is move forward. And so this is one of my favorite phrases, and everybody knows me this is kind of my mantra: be pleasantly persistent. Always collaborative, always with a smile. Take the time to acknowledge the work that people are doing, but keep coming back with whatever it is that you really feel like people need to acknowledge and to be aware of. And then the other thing I always advise people, take a moment to imagine what it's like for your other team members and their day. You know what it's like to deal with your child every day. Sometimes I wonder how I get through the day with that. These people made a commitment to actually work with your child every single day, and a bunch of others. And they do it with very little compensation, I might add. Sometimes I think they're a little crazy. But if you take the time to imagine what it's like to walk in their shoes, this kind of goes back to that idea that I had introduced before of offering resources to them. There may be something that if you were to give it to them would make it easier, or avail them access to, would make it easier for them to do their jobs effectively. So again, it's that, maybe there's something specific to the disability, maybe it's an additional resource in terms of equipment, if anything that you think would help that team member be more effective. There is no better way to establish a partnership than for the team member to feel that connection and be treated as a person, and to understand that you really are about supporting them as effectively as possible. Offer whatever resources you can to the team, as I said before. And then also schedule those assessments, whether they be in school or out of school. Take the time to schedule them. And if you're scheduling things outside of school, also make sure that you get on cancellation lists so that you can get things done as quickly as possible. I can't tell you how many times people have been scheduled 9 months out and then found themselves in front of that assessor a month later because they were on a cancellation list, and that's always a great thing. And then the other thing is, please, please, please take care of yourself. Going into meetings, make sure you're hydrated, make sure that you're fed, because I find people are much more pleasant. I know I'm much more pleasant when I'm not hungry. Pace yourself, get some rest, and be realistic about what you can achieve in each meeting. You may have a list that's 3 pages long, but you may have to chunk that down and really kind of take things, and it's like, how do you eat an entire elephant? One bite at a time, right? So take a little bit at a time. And sometimes I think if we do a little bit at a time and we have those little successes along the way, that of course fuels us as well. And ultimately it's about supporting your child in their development. So that's all I believe that I have for today. Are there any other questions?
Well, I think you covered the data portion of it well. I think that one of the things that parents aren't and sometimes surrogate parents aren't necessarily as adept in is knowing that the goals are measurable, that they're well written, and knowing when we talk about expectations, knowing that the expectations are reasonable expectations, that they are set high enough, but they're not set so high that the student can't achieve them.
Right.
I always get worried when I see 9 out of 10 times, and it's the first time. It's like, well, if they could do that, why are we even having that as a goal?
Right.
But I think that, if you could talk a little bit more about what role a surrogate can play in the team process, about making sure that those goals are appropriate and measurable, because I think a lot of people feel like that's what the other team members do. They come in with their own goals set, and where is their say in this?
Okay, so one of the things to remember, let me move back. This goes back to really understanding the process. When a school team comes to the table with their draft IEP, first, really do understand that it is just that. It's a draft. The IEP is developed by the entire team. Now, all of us who have worked, though, understand that there are things that people do to be more efficient. So these people have been working with your child every day, and it's a lot easier to respond to something that might already be in writing than it would be to try to develop something from scratch. So that's why you're getting that piece of paper. One of the things that is a critical skill is learning how to ask meaningful questions. So if you're looking at a goal, this child will demonstrate this behavior under these circumstances 5 out of 10 times. When you're looking at the behavior, first of all, is it the right behavior to be working on? And then the condition is really an important piece of this, because the overall goal for us is generalization of skills. Can they take what they've learned in school and do it out at home and in the community? So when is this happening? When is this skill happening? Because sometimes your performance criteria won't change, but the condition in which they're doing it will change. So having a real understanding of, okay, are they doing this at all? And if they are doing it at all, under what circumstances? Is it happening in a controlled environment, or is it happening in recess where things are all haywire? And if they are doing that in recess, are they doing it with support? Do they have some sort of visual cue? Do they have some sort of verbal cue, or are they actually able to do it without any prompts? But really being clear on what that behavior looks like right now. And if you're clear on what that behavior looks like right now and how frequently it's happening, then it becomes easier to determine, well, then now where's the next place that we can push them? So if you're not someone who's in the environment all the time, such as a surrogate parent, those are the questions I would be asking.
Okay.
You know, okay, so and there are ways to phrase questions so that people don't feel as though they're being put on the defensive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's things like, help me to understand, right? Help me to understand why you chose that particular setting, or help me to understand how they're doing this today, or what was the way that you came about deciding that this made the most sense. And that really invites a conversation. And then it may be that as you listen to it, you go, makes perfect sense. Thank you so much for sharing. Or it may be, I can see that, and I can see how you could draw that conclusion. Here are some other things that I think we need to consider. Perhaps we could tweak it this way, given this information over here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, so, you know, the draft is just that. It can be modified, and, you know, really about that respectful collaboration and asking questions that help to surface information that the entire team can use. Because I've even asked that question in meetings, and it didn't necessarily change my opinion about something, but another team member said, hey, you know what, I hadn't thought of that, and this is what's happening in my environment. And then it did actually change something.
Mm-hmm.
So gather the information. If it, you know, goes back to the understand the why. You know, if you keep asking to the point where it's just like, explain to me why you believe that. Okay, now explain to me why you believe that. Now explain, oh, now I get it. Okay, so this is what we need to do.
Great.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes. And an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So again, thank you, Beth. That was extremely helpful. And I'd like to remind everyone that you will receive a follow-up survey, which we ask you to complete. We value the information so that you can provide everyone with the most effective material to assist in your wonderful work in supporting our children. Please join us for some upcoming webinars. Our next webinar will be on August 21st about CBHI services, where we will be joined by Laura Conrad Labarente, Program Manager for the Children's Behavioral Health Initiative for the Commonwealth. On September 18th, our webinar is titled Care and Protection, the Role of Others Involved in SESP Students, and that is presented by Elizabeth Mello, licensed social worker. Our November 20th webinar is titled College Considerations for Students with Learning Differences, What to Expect, and it's being presented by Rachel Mason, Coordinator of Regional Recruitment for Beacon College. And of course, please do save the date and join us on November 27th for the RTSC's annual Making a Difference Conference, which will be held at the Best Western Hotel and Conference Center in Marlborough, as usual. And we look forward to seeing all of you there. In registration for those webinars as well as for the conference will be opening soon, so keep an eye out for that. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day.